Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this month's First Wednesday. My name is Peter Kariva, and I'm the lucky guy who gets to be a CEO of this aquarium. You know, every First Wednesday is special, but tonight is even more special. It's extra special, and it's not just the complimentary wine. But before I'm so excited about this topic that I'll totally screw up these notes because I really have a hard time following notes anytime, but when I'm excited about something, even harder. So I want to make sure I acknowledge our sponsors, Courtyard by Marriott, Steve and Brenda Olson and Osborne and Rook Trust, and the Onyx family and the Onyx Wine Company, which is providing the wine, very good wine. And this not just sponsored this night, it sponsors the whole First Wednesday series, so that's a heck of a lot of generosity. And here's how it works if you haven't been here before. We have a talk, 30 or 40 minutes, questions afterwards. There'll be volunteers running up and down with mics. You ask them. And then after the talk, we have a reception, cocktail hour, art. All the instructions are up there, and I'll remind you when I end the questions after the talk. And tonight's talk is special to me because, you know, I've never worked on orcas, but I've seen them in many. How many? I can't see the hands, but I wonder how many have actually seen orcas live. You can see them off the coast here. But they're spectacular animals, unbelievable animals. But tonight's also it's not just about orcas and the conservation, it's about their intelligence, it's about animal intelligence. One of the most active fields in biology now is we've learned to not evaluate intelligence the way we evaluate intelligence, which is very much written word, you know, the type of tests we do. Animals are proving to have an intelligence far superior in communication than any of us imagine. And I just find it, you know, I've always been a pet. And when I talk to my dog, I know he doesn't understand me, but he does understand a lot more than we give him credit for. And we're not just going to learn about orcas' intelligence, we're going to learn about Eva's intelligence. So that's very cool. It's a big scientific frontier. And lastly, I want to introduce our speaker, Dr. Deborah Giles. She got her PhD from UC Davis, and she now teaches at UW at Friday Harbor Labs. And she's the science and research director for the nonprofit Wild Orca. I just want to pause before she goes by the name Giles. I really like that because I like to go by the name PK. It's similar. Nobody can mispronounce it. But, you know, in these times, nonprofits are really important. So whatever your nonprofit is, support it. That's what I want to say. And Giles, we look forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, oh boy, you really can't see anything. I'm very excited to be here. Adina, thank you for all of your work getting us here. And PK, I'm so honored to have been introduced by you because I'm very familiar with your work. I wrote about you in one of my dissertation questions, one of the 5 questions I had to answer as a prospective PhD student. I wrote about you and your work in conservation biology. I think of myself as a conservation biologist, and I'll go into that a little bit more. So I'm very familiar with your work, so it's you're a rock star to me, so thank you. As was mentioned, I'm with Wild Orca. We're a nonprofit based on San Juan Island, and it's really, I'm living my dream. I go by my last name Giles as a tip of the hat to my dad, who didn't live long enough to see me fulfill my dream of working with killer whales. And so I started doing that when I started school when I was 30, which was a million years ago, at UC Davis. And so there you go. That's the story behind that. So Wild Orca's mission is to translate science into action to save the southern residents from extinction, and we're just sliding more and more towards that, unfortunately. We do our work in what we call our 3 different pillars, or in 3 different ways. We have our conservation research, where we utilize the scent detection superpowers of Eva. She allows us to non-invasively collect scat samples from killer whales, and we don't have to get anywhere near them. And then we also do strategic advocacy. So we translate science, we take journal articles and we translate them into language that's accessible to anybody. And then we give them tips on how to get involved with their legislators or with the public to pass on that information. And then I do a tremendous amount of policy engagement, so direct communication with our elected officials, mostly in Washington State, but a little bit more these days in Oregon, and hopefully going forward in California. But before we go more into our work, I've been asked to talk a bit about Orca intelligence. And to do that, we have to step back in time. 55 to 50 million years ago, near the Tethys Sea, the earliest whale fossils were found in what's now called Pakistan. The Pakicetus, the first cetacean or Archaeoceti, meaning ancient whale, was a wolf-like animal, 1 to 2 meters long, that lived in and around the water and ate fish and other animals that it could catch. If you haven't seen the video, When Whales Could Walk, it's well worth a watch. There's a lot of, it's a little bit hokey on some of the graphics, but the information is tremendous. So whales went through some really interesting adaptations over the next several million years as they moved from land back into the marine realm. The loss of arms and legs and the migration of nostrils to the top of the head being some of the most obvious. The earliest known killer whales fossils date back to the Pliocene epoch, which was 5.3 to 2.6 million years ago. And these were from Orcinus sidonensis, I might be saying that wrong, which were found in Italy. The name, I say killer whale, you'll hear me say killer whale more than orca. I'm trying to get better about that, but I say killer whale. Latin name is Orcinus orca, which roughly translates to something like demon from the underworld or whale from hell, something like that, which isn't necessarily much better than killer whale. So I might interchange a little bit, but that's where that name came from. Oh, I do want to give a shout out to these slides that have to do with evolution, came from Dr. Lori Moreno, who is the leading world's expert on whale brains, specifically killer whale brains. So what happened? Yeah, there we go. So as cetaceans evolved, their brains became larger in absolute size and relative to their body, and the neocortex became more elaborated. The brain of a killer whale is highly gyrated, meaning it has many different folds. Gyration, or gyrification, gyration is something very different. Gyrification allows the brain to fit more surface area into a small skull, which increases the brain's cognitive functionality. Corticalization, which we see up here, killer whales have the highest corticalization of any brain, refers to the transferring of cognitive functions from the primitive brain part of the brain to the cerebral cortex, which is responsible for higher learning. This evolutionary migration is apparent among higher species with complex cognitive skills like humans and killer whales. And then encephalization down there you see with humans have the highest encephalization quota. That refers to the evolutionary increase in the relative size and complexity of the brain compared to the overall body size of the animal. It has been used as a proxy for intelligence, and thus is a possible way of comparing the intelligence levels of different species. The paralimbic system is really interesting in killer whales. So the paralimbic lobe in cetaceans is highly elaborated. It's a region with dense connections to the limbic system, which is more of a basic system. Killer whales have a highly developed insula and signet sulcus that give them self-awareness, understanding of social relationships, and empathy. The paralimbic system in killer whales is a complex part of their brain that's responsible for processing emotions and higher thinking. It's more intricate than the paralimbic system even in humans, and some scientists believe that it helps killer whales combine information from different parts of their brain. The insula or insular cortex highlighted in these photos show that it's much bigger and more developed in killer whales than it is in humans. And again, having to do with self-awareness, social emotions, and motor control. So putting this all together, we see the intelligence, and I really loved what you said about intelligence, because intelligence it's an interesting thing to think about when we're comparing species. I always think about species as being intelligent if they're highly adapted to their world, to their natural history, who they are as individuals. And we definitely see that in killer whales. With cultural transmission of things like dialect, language among individuals within a population, what they're going to eat is definitely passed on from mom. These really social, complex families that they stay in. Killer whales, especially fish-eating killer whales, are really unique in the mammal world in that both males and females stay with their mother their entire life, which is it's just almost unheard of. Very self-aware animals. So we'll get into this a little bit more as the talk goes on. So now moving to a specific population of killer whales. We Washingtonians, I'm a former Californian, born and raised in Sacramento, but find my home now in Washington State. Washingtonians tend to claim southern residents as our whales, but really these whales are not. They come all the way down here to California. One of the reasons I was really excited to be invited to speak here was because we need to be thinking about southern resident killer whales as California's whales as well. So it's one clan called J Clan. And within that clan, there's 3 pods, J pod, K pod, and L pod. And in total, there are only 73 individual animals on the planet, which is shocking. It's a very, very low number. You can see the population, how it has changed over time. This here, 1976, was the end of the capture era, where there were 72 individual southern residents. The population increased for a time, and then it declined here because all of the females that should have been in the wild giving birth to babies had been taken and put into marine parks or killed in the process. Starting in kind of the mid-'80s, all the way through 1995, the population increased at a very, very healthy rate. And we got all the way up to 98 individual killer whales in the census, the 1995 census. And then this decline here, which represents a 20% decline in the population. That was not directly related to the capture era. Maybe there were some residual impacts there, but really something else was going on here. And that's when the Center for Biological Diversity, originally California-based nonprofit, petitioned the federal government to list this population of whales on the endangered species list. That's a whole lecture separate that would take me an hour or more to get through. Suffice it to say, they were listed in 2005, and things have been going the wrong way since then. But back to who they are. They're really unique. They only eat fish, preferentially Chinook salmon, the fattiest, the biggest, most lipid-rich of the Pacific salmon species. Again, unique dialects within the population, within the pods, but then as a clan, they speak the same language. All of that, what they're eating, who they're hanging out with as far as staying with their family, what they're saying, all of that is culturally transmitted, and therefore could be likened back, or connected back to this idea of intelligence in the species. Another thing, they have a lot of different cultural aspects to this population that are really unique. Other killer whales kelp, but not to the degree that the southern residents kelp. They'll go out of their way to roll around in kelp beds. This picture here is twins now. They're from Santa Cruz. This is when they were about 6. They're 23 now. This is a picture of J2, the oldest known killer whale on the planet. She died when she was somewhere between her late 80s or 105. Very, very old animal. This is J2 barrel rolling up the west side of San Juan over the course of about 40 minutes, just rolling around up through this kelp. This is a young J-pod whale that got dropped off in this kelp mat when his mom went off foraging with the rest of her family. And he just hung out there for about an hour and played in that kelp. really interesting. We don't know why they do it. They've got very sensitive skin, so it might just feel good. I always think about it like they're in a spa bath or something. They also, we've heard, on the news kind of ad nauseum, this salmon hats. That's a fad that kind of goes in and out with this population. Another really cool thing that they do is what we see, we call it a greeting ceremony. And this, we used to see it quite often in the Salish Sea. I hope it happens when they're elsewhere. But it's when two pods will come together after having not been together for a while. And they'll line up. This is one pod lined up, peck to peck, all in a line there. And then back here, if you squint, you can kind of see another pod lined up, facing each other. And they'll just hover there at the surface of the water. And we don't know what they're doing. There's not a lot of vocalizations that are happening at this time, but something will happen at some point over the course of several minutes or even longer, where a cue will be given and the whales just end up engaging in this massive whale ball. Surface actives all over the place. The old females will go off together and socialize, and the young ones will go off together. This used to be one of the ways that we could tell when a female was pregnant, because you'd have breeding age females that are just coming into estrus around those females that were pregnant. The male is off playing and what we call sword fighting. You can kind of maybe get an idea of what that might be. Just a really cool thing to get to see. We don't see this very much now because there's not as much food in the inland waters of the Salish Sea to bring them back in at the same time, like a whole pod together, let alone two pods at the same time. So when the whales were listed in 2005, the main identified threats to the population were lack of prey, specifically Chinook salmon, exposure to vessels, so the physical presence and the associated noise with vessels. You can see this is a picture of J27, one of our oldest males, born in 1991. This is an ocean-going vessel that this type of vessel is increasing, I think, 4 to 8 times annually now, because the ports up in Vancouver are expanding. So these vessels, when we can see one on the horizon, it's potentially loud enough to mask the whale's ability to echolocate and find food. So now that this type of vessel is increasing, this is a very, very big concern, not to mention the potential for a collision or a grounding where this vessel might run into problems. If we had a catastrophic spill like happened in Valdez, the Salish Sea would be wiped out and the southern residents right along with them. Exposure to toxicants, so toxicants meaning man-made chemicals that are in the food web and making their way into the southern residents. I'll talk more about why that's such a big problem in a minute. So again, I mentioned the range. We see their range that was finally designated. Again, these whales were listed in 2005. It took the federal government until 2021 to designate the outer coast all the way down to Monterey as critical habitat for these guys. Really important because they do utilize the offshore of, actually near shore, not more than probably 8 miles offshore, all the way down L-pod and K-pod. L-pod and K-pod do. J-pod's not really seen south of Washington, but K's and L's come all the way down to Monterey. And there's some killer whale colleagues in the audience that can actually speak to that more than I can because they document this. So shout out to Alyssa Schulman-Janiger, who's here, yay, and Diana Alps is here, and Lindsay Cruz is in the audience. I love that these folks came out to see this talk, so thank you. We need to be really educating the public in California about getting involved to help protect California water and California fisheries for these whales. So the southern residents, they only eat fish, like I mentioned. They preferentially they co-evolved eating Pacific salmon, meaning they were, so the original killer whales were actually fish eaters. Mammal-eating killer whales came later. And that probably happened because they were separated by probably glaciers. They were physically separated from each other, and different groups of killer whales had access to different prey bases. And that just stuck with them. And it makes sense when you have a massive apex predator like a killer whale, where the only thing that can kill a killer whale is another killer whale or a human. It makes sense to habitat partition or prey partition so that they diminish that potential for conflict. So these whales only eat fish. You can see, this is an old picture taken from the Center for Whale Research. This is a full-grown killer whale with this massive fish on its head. This is one of the last known photos. You absolutely cannot see it in this lighting, but this is J2 again. And then her grand offspring, probably, or at least a member of the J2s or the J14s. And up here, you can't see it, but there's a fish. And again, this is one of the last photos that was taken of her. She, I can tell you, was absolutely hungry. But instead of eating that fish, she worked for about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour, to push that fish towards this young calf because his mom had died earlier that year. So she wanted to make sure that he knew how to forage. And again, these whales, I don't know if I said it actually, they cooperatively hunt and they share food. They will catch a fish and bite it in half and let one or even two pieces of it go, even though they could eat the whole thing themselves and probably want to because they're hungry. They don't. Whenever they're near their family members, they share portions of that meal. This is the problem, though, is that there's not enough fish, and there's not enough fish that are big anymore. Look at these massive fish. These are 121 pound and 116 pound, almost 5 feet tall Chinook salmon. This is the kind of fish that the southern residents co-evolved eating. They're tiny now, and the problem started, this picture here is of sockeye salmon, but the same thing happened with all species of salmon and all small forage fish from California all the way up to Alaska, where massive, we became incredibly efficient killing machines, able to extract almost all of the fish out of the marine realm with no regard for the marine predators that were out there looking for that same prey. This is from a fabulous book put out by a Washington-based journalist named Linda Mapes. It's called Orca, Shared Waters, Shared Future. She just goes, this is actually outdated. It's worse news than this shows. But just showing all of the different river systems that the southern residents co-evolved eating salmon from. And this is one of the biggest problems, is that not necessarily California, but from middle of Oregon all the way up to Alaska, the most fish that are caught in the Alaskan troll fishery, not trawling, not bottom trawling, but troll fishery, up to 97% of fish caught in the troll fishery in Alaska is not native to Alaska. And yet, because it's caught in Alaska, it gets branded as Alaskan caught wild Chinook salmon, sold throughout the world, literally throughout the world, as a sustainably harvested fish. And yet, up to 13 runs, I think it's actually up to 18 runs of salmon that are being caught in Alaska are on the endangered species list themselves. And this tells you this amount of money here, $80 a pound. And this is actually a sustainably harvested fish. And you know that because it gives you the river of origin. It says Copper River. If you don't see, well, you can tell by the price. It might say wild-caught Chinook salmon, but if it doesn't have the name or the price is probably outside of the realm of most of our budgets, it's most likely not from Alaska and rather from BC, Canada, Oregon, or Washington, and not sustainably, it's not a sustainable fish. It's a fish that's on the endangered species list. This is one of the biggest issues that I work on, and trying to educate the public and policymakers about what we need to do to change this. So this is actually my favorite graph. It's a little busy, but it tells the whole story. And essentially what we see here, every color is a different river that is represented throughout the southern residents' entire range, from Central California all the way up to Southeast Alaska. And essentially, if you look at the graph, the colorful graph, and kind of squint and just look at it as far as the peaks and valleys, and then up at the top is a negative bar chart. So the longer the purple bar, the more deaths within the southern resident community that year. And it's pretty clear. When we have low numbers of Chinook salmon available to the whales, we have high numbers of deaths. This is a little out of date. It's actually, we're down in another trough here. We have to figure out ways to make sure that these whales are getting enough to eat throughout their entire range, throughout the entire year, and we're not doing that. Sorry, that kind of slipped. Okay. So what's wild orca doing about it? So to understand what's happening on the inside of the whale, we study something that's coming out. We can do some of this work. People can do this kind of work by looking at blood samples, but of course we don't want to be taking blood from wild killer whales, and certainly not killer whales that are on the endangered species list. So the next best thing is to collect their feces. I'll get the hang of this at the end, I promise. So we, again, as I mentioned, we utilize the superpowers of Eba, the whale dog. She stands on the front of the boat. You can see her out there. This was during this is actually right after we put our boat on the water. This is our new boat. And she stands up there on the bow, and her body language will indicate to us where to go to find the sample. And this is kind of an idealized setup, where the whales are going, say, from this side of your screen to the other side. Somebody poops, the wind's coming down from on top of the screen, and it comes across that sample and picks up what we call the scent cone. And that's exactly what happens is that, sorry, I think my ears are changing shape. Okay, is this good? Okay. As we're transecting downwind of the whale's path, so we let the whales go 400 or 500 meters or even more sometimes, and then we just transect behind them and downwind and to the side, waiting for one of them to poop, and then we are waiting for the wind to come up and pick that scent up and broadcast it out where Eba's gonna scent it. And Eba will pick up the scent way out at the edge of the scent cone, where it might take us until we're right in the center of the scent cone to feel it. And as we're entering that green part of the triangle, Eba will have the first of her changes of behavior. And that might look like her body getting stiff. She might move to the front of the boat. She might stand up on the front of the boat like you saw in that past picture, and actually you can see her in this picture. And then as we're getting closer and closer to the red, the center of the scent cone, she'll start crouching down on the bow. And then as we're moving past the center, she starts crab walking along the side of the boat. Almost like, wait, it's back there. And if she actually jumps down, we know we've gone too far. And so depending on how close we are, we can be up to a nautical mile away from this scat sample, and she can pick it up. As we get closer and closer, her behaviors become more and more focused, to the point where Jim or I will be on the front of the boat. She's leaning all the way over the front, and she's just barely moving her head to the left or to the right, or sometimes even just flaring her nostril. And that is telling us, and we communicate with each other using sign language kind of about where to go. And ultimately, she'll take us right up to the scat sample. This is the most asked question I get is, what does whale poop look like? This is what beautiful whale poop looks like. This is what we want to see. This is really fatty rich, it's lipid rich, it's floating at the surface, it'll stay there for a long time, assuming the water's not too turbulent. Nowadays, unfortunately, sometimes this is all we find. Tiny, tiny little specks. This is probably big enough to do all of the analysis that we want to do, but it can be as small as your small pinky fingernail, and Eba can still smell it. Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. Let me see if this will work. This is what she's working for.
Good job. Good
girl. So that was early on. That was her first year. We figured out that it wasn't even the Kong that she wanted to play with. It was just the rope, which is really handy because we always have boat line on the boat. So she'll work for hours in order to be able to do that with her people for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. So these are some of the things, just some of the things that we can learn from one scat sample. Of course, we know who it is because we're near them. As far as the species, we can tell in analysis, unless it's from a scat sample, which is rare. We usually try and orient the boat behind large groups. I always say more butts. The more butts, the better, because then the chances of getting a scat sample are higher. But occasionally we're behind just one animal. But if not, then we wait for our lab folks at the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. That's who we are partnering with for our analysis. They can extract the DNA from what we call the pooper. We're also now able to extract the prey DNA. So we can say that sample is made up of 80% Chinook and 5% coho, 5% chum, that sort of thing, which is really exciting. Moving forward, our next big step is going to be able to, we want to be able to really drill down for the DNA of the prey. So it's Chinook salmon from the Fraser River, and not only Fraser River, but the North Thompson arm of the Fraser River, that sort of thing. So drill down to the river of origin, which would really be helpful for managers, wildlife managers that are responsible for recovering this population of whales. We can tell if a female is pregnant, but not only that she's pregnant, we can tell how pregnant. Nutritional status, so how are the whales getting enough to eat or not? Usually not. Toxicant levels and different toxicants. We're partnering now, and we're leaving early tomorrow morning to go down and meet with our new lab partners at the San Diego State University, where they're going to be able to extract toxicants using a fairly new technique called non-targeted analysis. So instead of looking at a fecal sample, asking the question, is there PCBs in there, or is DDT in there, or flame retardants, or whatever, their way of analyzing scat samples is broader. They just say, here's the poop, what's in there? So it's both exciting and a little terrifying to know what we're going to end up finding. Parasites, bacteria, fungus, really anything that you can do, anything that you can extract from a blood sample, we now are able to do using a fecal sample. And again, non-invasively collected because we can stay so far away from the animals. So some of the findings to date, up to almost 70%, 69.8% of the females in this population, remember, only 73 individuals right now, 69.8% of the animals in this population are failed pregnancies. So the females get pregnant, they don't have a problem getting pregnant, they have a problem staying pregnant. So they're miscarrying before the fetus is born viable, or the baby is born and dies right away. Like we keep seeing over and over in this population, as most tragically and world known, J35, who now has had 2 female calves die, and that she goes on to carry around another prime example of orca intelligence, that she is capable of grief, that she's expressing that through carrying this deceased calf for, in the first case, it was 17 days she carried her dead baby. We see an amplification of toxicants because the whales are metabolizing their fat stores. They're not getting enough to eat on a regular basis. Killer whales are like we are, where they have to eat every day to maintain optimal health. They're not like humpback whales or gray whales that have evolved over time to go through long periods of fasting. Killer whales have to eat every day like we do. And when they don't, they start metabolizing their fat stores, which releases the toxicants, which are in most cases what are called lipophilic toxicants, so they're fat-loving toxicants. So as long as the whales are eating enough every day, it's like the fat goes out there and grabs onto the chemicals and stores it safely until the whales start metabolizing it. And that happens during pregnancy as well. In a very sad case, we had a highly pregnant female in J-pod wash up on a beach in Canada. Her calf, she was trying to give birth to a calf, turned out it was a female, full-grown female calf. We're not sure if it died before, but it definitely died in the birth canal, and she was trying to birth it. And horrible case. Rhapsody was her name. She was an amazing animal. But we were able to, veterinarians at the CDOC Society and the veterinarian in Canada, they were able to, for the first time, to actually get samples, tissue samples from that calf and show that, in fact, the toxicants were transferring to the calf in utero. Not all of the toxicants from mom goes in while she's gestating the calf, but almost 100% of the toxicants that she has ingested over the period of time in her life since she had gave birth and nursed her previous calf, by the end of nursing, a female has given almost 100% of the toxicants that she's bioaccumulated to her calf. So it's a bad situation. In best case scenario, female gets pregnant. This is going to sound horrible, but a female gets pregnant, gives birth, is able to lactate for a year. We might lose that calf, but the good news is that the next calf would not, hopefully she would get pregnant right away. The next calf would not be taking on that chemical burden that its sibling did. So increase in stress hormones, just like you and me, if we don't eat for long periods of time, we get cranky. And all of this kind of works synergistically in a negative way to increase the odds of early disease and death. So that's super sad, and I'm sorry to talk about that, but it's the fact. I mean, we are having both males and females in this population die when they are within breeding age, and also on the other end of the population, we are not having the recruitment into the population in the form of calves being born and living and going on to have calves of their own or siring calves of their own. So it's a bad situation all the way around. The good news is that we actually know what we need to do to change this. More bad news is that so far politically it hasn't happened. We haven't been able to change fisheries management in the way that needs to be changed in order to make sure that these whales have a place at the table. They're not factored into fisheries management quotas where a certain amount of food is given to made sure that those southern residents have access to that food. We can talk more about that. I've got ideas about things people can do to get involved. I do want to talk about this. We have our amazing hosts this evening with Onyx Wine. We have a whale named Onyx, and he's a really interesting animal. They're all interesting as individuals. The more you study them and learn about them, they all have their own very rich lives. But this whale in particular is very interesting. Again, L87 is his alphanumeric and Onyx is his given name. He was born in 1992 to L32, a female who died in 2005. Now, if you remember back a couple minutes ago, I said that males and females stay with their mother their entire life, mostly, except this guy and maybe one other that we know of. He has actually changed pods. After his mom died, he moved to K-pod and hung out with K7 and her daughter K11 until both of those animals died in 2008 and 2010. And then he moved to J-pod and hung out with J8 and J2, the two oldest females in J-pod, for a while. Spiden, J8 died in 2013, and as I mentioned, J2, otherwise known as Granny, died in 2016. After she died, Onyx moved to J17, Princess Angelina, for a while until she died. It kind of sounds like he's like a black widow. I don't think it has anything to do with him attaching himself to them that's causing. He just tends to, I don't know what, but yeah. We'll leave that for him. The good news is that he's still alive, which is really, really rare. Males whose mothers have died are 8 to 12 times more likely to die in the year following their mother's death compared to males whose mothers haven't died. And the difference between the 8 and 12% has to do with whether or not their mom is post-reproductive. Killer whales are one of 5 species on the planet that have menopause, so these females have more life after they give birth to their last calf than they do in leading up to and through their breeding age, which is very rare. So males whose mothers are post-reproductive who die, those are the guys that are most at risk of dying. And that's because these guys really are mama's boys. These females preferentially forage for their sons, feed their sons. That's a whole nother topic, which is super interesting. Anyway, I just did want to give a shout out to Onyx Wines by showing you that Southern residents have a whale named Onyx, spelled differently, but same thing, unique, and just like your wines are unique and amazing. So in summary, I'm trained conservation biologist, and one of the basic tenets of the discipline of conservation biology is that species have intrinsic value separate from what humans can gain from them. And these whales are so unique and as a population and as individuals. I just want to show this photo. This is one of my favorite photos ever taken by, it got cut off, Captain Jim Maya. Took this photo, and people see this and think it's a mom and calf, when actually they're brothers. J27 is the big one. That's Blackberry, and his little brother, this photo was taken some time ago, but when Mako J39 was a lot smaller. But the fact that these 2 whales and their sister, who's in between, who's gone on to give birth herself, the fact that they're still alive is a testament to their social bonding. By all accounts, J27, the old male, should have died because, as I mentioned, they die quite often when mom dies. But not only is he still alive, but he was managed to keep his brother and sister alive. And so we just are going to continue doing the work that we do, pushing for change in fisheries management in order to hopefully continue to have this population of animals in the future. I want to I'm going to skip through this because I want to make sure that we've got a lot of time for Q&A. My amazing team, Jim, you can see him there. Eba's here, our board of directors, and this is a former student of mine, Aisha. She was with us for 2 years. Hopefully she'll be back again this next year. And then all of these other folks just volunteer their time to help with writing, doing graphics, all kinds of stuff. So we could not do this work without the team. And then our donors, as PK mentioned, nonprofit work is hard. We need funding. This is an expensive program, but it's an important program because we are able to tell so much about what's happening on the inside of these whales without ever having to touch them, and we can stay completely non-invasive. So here's my contact information. I do have some cards here if anybody wants to take them, but I think I'll just leave this up here, and then we can do Q&A.
Our amazing volunteers will be racing up and down the stairs to give you microphones.
Thank you for your talk. As you're aware, we've had a fire situation here that's going to result in a lot of toxic waste leaching into the ocean ecosystem. Do mammals like this that come up and test the air and such, do they sense that? Not just killer whales, but whales or porpoises in general?
That's a great question, and I have to say it's something that I keep thinking about because PBDEs or flame retardants are very prevalent in these whales. More so in J-Pod. I'm probably not now because of everything that's been happening down here in California and Oregon over the last couple of years. But the short answer to your question is we don't think so, and that's based on what happened in Alaska in Valdez. Those whales did not seem to sense the sheen and the odor that was coming. They don't have a sense of smell, for one thing. They didn't seem to avoid the oil spills at all at that time. And so that's kind of the most Alyssa, you might know some other examples of that. That's the one that I know of the most, where it was very clear that the whales just didn't know to avoid the area. So one of the things that we do, I do want to get your comment on that, Alyssa, if you don't mind. But really quick, one of the things that we're working on in the San Juans is hazing the whales. So using Oyakomi pipes to bang on pipes in the presence of whales if there is an oil slick or a gasoline slick. And we're new into this with the Southern residents. It has been successfully used in other situations, but ideally the case would be that we would want to keep them away from the area as much as possible and not run the risk of them getting in there. Do you have any other examples?
I was just going to say that I can't think of. Yeah. We haven't had many, Lisa Schulman-Janiger, we haven't had many oil spills in our area, and to my knowledge, I can't think of any cases in which we had a killer whale encounter, killer whales that went through the area or avoided the area. I know there was one not too many years ago off San Juan that we were really, really concerned about, and people were watching. We did have oil spill off of the Santa Barbara area that people watched. We didn't have any killer whales that happened to be in the area, so I can't think of any specific instances in which there's been any that have come through that to be able to look to see if they directly avoided it or not, as far as I know.
Yeah, so our plan is to just be prepared by many, many boats all lining up and basically creating a curtain of noise to hopefully just exclude them from an area.
Thank you so much for your work and fantastic presentation. Something of a long-winded question is, there is a fascinating study that came out of the sperm whales off the coast of Dominica last year that indicated that they might have a symbolic alphabet in terms of how they communicate with each other. Given the diversity of complex killer whale behavior just globally, it would be easy to presume that they might have it themselves, although that is currently unproven. But with that said, something in wildlife, among wildlife managers and researchers, is kind of a growing fear that we might be over-monitoring some species kind of into extinction, kind of just, oh, this is kind of a cool study here, but it's not necessarily part of the applied conservation effort in order to maintain those and expand those populations. So I guess my question is, do you see kind of a place for having a better understanding of orca intelligence, orca culture, and killer whale just cognition in general within applied conservation?
Absolutely. And one of the ways that we in the San Juans are trying to get a handle on pressure, especially research pressure, on this incredibly threatened population is to combine studies. So we're doing that like I'm sharing samples with colleagues at the CDOC Society and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada and OceanWise. Instead of having a number of different boats out there collecting fecal samples, we're collecting them and then broadcasting our samples out for other organizations to be able to use, asking different questions. Colleagues at the Center for Whale Research just this last fall partnered with another group called Orca Behavior Institute to do a study that was looking at dialect and whether or not, so that this, again, non-invasive, being able to stay really far away from the animals, deploying an acoustic array where they would be able to orient triangulate the sound to a specific whale, or at least a number of whales within a small area, and then coupling that with drone imagery. So coupling behavior with vocalizations, trying to see if certain vocalizations are given during different behavior states. So things like that, where we can learn a huge amount while also always trying to be as cognizant of reducing the impact of our behavior. More and more and more, we're moving to non-invasive techniques. We don't have to get anywhere near these animals to be able to do the work that we're doing. Yeah, that's why we utilize the scent detection dog, because she allows us to stay so far away. You wouldn't know it by looking at her right now. She's just all crashed out. But if she was on a boat, and you should have seen her earlier today when Peter took us by the shark tank. She was like, what? I think she was getting ready to, I don't know what shark poop smells like, but we could train her.
It's my turn. So I'm really interested about what can be done through the regulatory process or through legislation. I hear good things about your governor when he ran for president, and I think of Washington State as a pretty environmentally friendly place, in California and Oregon too. So this is really good data, and I hope there are steps that the legislature or elected officials or regulators can do to help to solve some of these problems that are imperiling the orcas.
Yeah, so you're talking about Governor Inslee, who is not our governor anymore. He established the Orca Task Force, which was trying to understand the threats to the whales and then figure out at a state level what could be done to address those threats. So that was a good process. We need to continue that. We need to have an Orca Task Force number 2. Our new governor, Bob Ferguson, is an environmentalist, I would say, not as much as Inslee was. Governor Ferguson is very focused on human issues, which are important as well. I have a definite, he's top of my list when he just was our attorney general. He just stopped being attorney general to become the governor. And I was able to give talks 3 times in his office to his staff, his environmental staff. And they asked me from a legal perspective, what can be done, what should be done. So I have hope that we'll continue to take the momentum that Inslee started and continue that with Governor Ferguson. It can't be just at a state level, though. And so we need to continue, not just on the West Coast, but continue to talk to elected officials in other states that have a passion for the southern residents, because although, like I said, we kind of claim these whales along the West Coast, they're an international treasure. And so hopefully we can figure out ways to make really fisheries management changes. That's what we need to focus on. And that is definitely not at a state level. That's at a federal and international level. It's hard work because it's.
Hi. It seems like the whales kind of have a benign attitude toward humans in the water. And so I was wondering why do you think that is? And also, what the behaviors that the press has said are going on over around Spain, and that supposedly attacking boats. What do you maybe attribute that to? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So there's never been a lethal attack of a killer whale on a human in the wild. There has, of course, in captivity. I think that the reason for that is that no mother ever taught their offspring that humans were food. And that, what they eat is definitely one of those cultural things that's passed down by mom and grandmother. So humans just never were part of the menu for any killer whale population on the planet. They are incredibly socially interactive. They love to interact with things in their environment. And there are individuals within populations that seem to be even more curious about what's in their environment. So, we had, I hinted at it, the southern residents do this thing called wearing, salmon hats. We saw it in, I think the first time it was documented was in '87, which happened to be the first year that I ever saw them. I have a photo. I wish I could find it. I have a box of old actual photos. If people, you young people don't know what those are, but there used to be these things that you could hold in your hand. I have one of those of a whale with a fish draped across its head right at Lime Kiln. This is a behavior that one of them started, and it just kind of passed through the population. It came into vogue, it came into style, and then it went back out again. And it pops up occasionally over the, since then, since '87. It really came back in 2005, where we were seeing it quite a bit then. Also, phocenicide. I co-wrote a paper that we published, was that last year or now the year before? Recently, called phocenicide. That's a made-up word. I just made it up. Phocina is the genus species for harbor porpoise, and this is where the fish-eating killer whales interact with porpoise, both Dahl's porpoise and harbor porpoise, to the point where it ends up, in some cases, killing the porpoise. But the whales don't eat them. They don't take a bite. They've never taken a bite. In fact, some of the porpoise that we've been able to retrieve from the water, you can't even tell that they were with a killer whale. Like externally, there's no damage, which is really interesting. Like, what's that about? Why are they doing that? We don't know. We have over 80 accounts of it, but again, what's happening in Spain? Thank you. My husband up here is like, answer Spain. The Spain thing is really interesting. Again, we have killer whales that are known to interact with boats that are on, like, anchored or on a buoy, things like that. They'll just kind of drag them around by the chain or by the anchor chain. Some killer whales like to rub up on boats. I think we've seen. It's not uncommon where a young, in fact, those guys, J27 and J39, we were trying to put a suction cup tag on them, which is non-invasive. I mean, it takes a while to get the suction cup on, but it doesn't puncture their skin one time. And the best way to get a suction cup tag on a killer whale is to wait until they're just socializing, because they don't pay attention to what's going on around them often. And J39 grabbed onto the trailing edge of the dorsal fin for his big brother, and J27 just took him for a ride. So that's what I think of when I heard about those whales that were interacting with the boats in the Strait of Gibraltar, is that they were mouthing the keel and the rudder, like going up, rubbing on it. The video that I've seen, the whales rub their heads on the bottom of the boat. I don't think of it as being agonistic or aggressive from the animals. If they wanted to attack the boat, they easily could be sinking these boats pretty quickly. And they have some boats, I think 5 or less than 10 of the hundreds of interactions have resulted in a boat that actually sinks. Other people might have other opinions about what's going on there, but I think it's just a social thing. One of them did it, others saw, and started doing it. Why? I think, personally, I think it has something to do with the vibration of the boat as it's moving through the water, or the way that the water is coming around the keel or near the rudder, that the whales are interested in. There's some sort of positive reinforcement that's going on there. It's a very scary situation, though, because people are starting to take the situation into their own hands, and I do worry about the health of the animals. Do you have any other comments about what are your thoughts about that? I'm turning to Lisa Schulman-Janiger, because she's a killer whale expert as well. I'd love to know your thoughts on that. Can we get a mic? And then we'll come back to you in the middle.
Yeah, I'm in your camp. I absolutely think it's a form of play, that one does it and other ones pick it up, and they pick up behaviors like we've seen a couple of our young killer whale calves playing with prawn traps, pulling on the line. One imitates the other. Now they're going around with entanglement scars on them, little Astrid Nova, just born this last 6 months. So I think it's a form of play, and it's particularly it seems to be involving juveniles for the most part, and they don't seem to be, ramming boats, trying to sink the boats, going after the people, not directed toward people, not in going back for revenge for past sins of humans or anything like that.
Right.
It probably will fade like other fads do, but if they continue to be stimulated and more involved, it may persist for a while. And people, there's groups, Facebook groups, in which people will talk about, I've been through this area, there's some killer whales, make sure you're in the shallower water, stop your boat right away. They give you hints of different things you could try to do. Doesn't seem to be targeted at the people. It's all, again, with the rudders. So from everybody that I've talked to, everyone thinks it's a type of play and a fad that we don't particularly like and can be definitely
Right.
scary.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. The first Zoom call I ever did was in 2020 after COVID, and it was about this topic, and I think there were 50 incidences, and now we're up over 500, which is crazy.
Time for 2 more questions.
I have a really quick, simple question, or maybe not. How does one train a dog to find the whale
Yeah.
poop?
Yeah, thanks for that. So Eba's our 5th whale dog. This program used to be a program at the University of Washington, and it was started by Dr. Samuel Wasser, and he was the first person on the planet that used scent detection dogs for conservation work. And he was doing a study on North Atlantic right whales with a couple of other colleagues, and that was right around the time during 9/11. They started, I think, in 1999, and it went through 2002. And they wanted to see if dogs could find whale poop, so they chose that, number one, because it's highly impacted or imperiled population as well, but also they wanted to see about the dog thing because, and using a species like that where North Atlantic right whale poop is massive, it's red, it's super stinky, oily, you can see it from a plane. And so they wanted to be able to use a dog where they knew the scent was out there themselves and be able to look at the dog's change of behavior. So that's where it first started, was on the East Coast. And then again, that kind of ended in 2002, around then. And the Southern residents were in the process of being listed. Well, Sam is a professor at the University of Washington, and he thought, well, gosh, we should see if dogs can find southern resident killer whale poop. We had no idea really what it looked like in the wild. Of course, SeaWorld had ideas, but we couldn't, it's not a direct comparison because of, what those whales eat. So he had the first dog going out there, and they did have to do what's called close fluke follows, where you kind of you're on the front of the boat, the dog is on the front of the boat, and you just kind of check in the path of the whales, in the fluke print. So when a whale swims, it pumps its tail stalk, and it creates this lens, this high tension lens of water. And you can kind of look in that. It's like a looking glass. It's kind of cool when the water's super calm. And you can see things that start to either are left at the surface or start to percolate up. And so they did that, and they got a couple scat samples where they knew it came out of the whale. And then the way that you train the dog, number one, is as soon as that dog smells that, you let the dog play with their toy. But then for like Eba, we used formerly collected scat samples, which we have a collection of in our freezer. The whole bottom shelf on the door is not for food. And so you take that old scat sample, and then you literally just, when you're first training, you let the dog smell it and give him the toy. And then let him smell it, give him the toy. Let him smell it and give him the toy. And that can last for a day or more, depending on the dog. Some dogs get it right away. Eba got it right away. Some dogs never get it. And so you're looking for dogs with high play drive. That's number one, is a dog that is play motivated over food motivated. And then the next step is you take that scat sample and you put it in the middle of a field where you know where the prevailing wind is coming from, and then you just walk the dog downwind of it and wait for the dog to have the change of behavior and let the dog go to the scat sample and immediately let them play again. That might, Eva got that within about a half a day. The next step is you have to hide it from the handler and the dog, because you don't want the handler to accidentally be taking the dog right to the scat sample. And again, that's when the handler is really learning the cues of the dog. Well, for terrestrial poop, or even things like Sam trained his dogs to find owl pellets and snake sheds and anything that is biological that is left by an animal, you can, or even plant or insect. With the whale dogs, there's one final step, because the poop is moving. So you have to put the poop in a bowl, put it out alongside of the boat, drive the boat away, and then orient the boat downwind of where that scat sample is, and wait for the dog to have the change of behavior. Well, the reason that it can take us a while to get to the scat sample is because the poop is moving with the water. And so we might be cruising along, Eva has a change of behavior, we turn in, but the poop's over here now, so she might lose it. So then we have to go parallel again, downwind, and wait for her to hit it again. And so it ends up being this, like you saw on the thing, a zigzag motion until we can finally, she brings us right alongside of the scat sample. It's pretty phenomenal. So she learned it in 4 days. Other dogs took more like a week or more.
One more question.
Hi, my name is Val. I am going out once a week now with the aquarium on the whale watching boats. And we lately have been seeing a group of 4 to 6 orcas. I'm wondering if these are part of the pods that you are referencing in your talk. And I'm also wondering what the general community can do to try to save these beautiful animals. It seems that so little is said about them except they are killer whales. And I object to that term. I would much rather use the term orca because it gives a better impression.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking that on some of these community boat rides and things like that, that some of the talks could be geared more to what these orcas are and what the problems are that are facing them.
Uh-huh. So I can answer the first part of your question, and then I'm going to kick it to some of the other folks that are in the audience who work on the whale watch boats and who have been, our community members here. The answer is no. The southern residents have never been documented this far south. The farthest southern extent for them is Monterey so far. I don't see any reason that they would ever change that. Again, because if they go into other territory, then they're overlapping with another population of killer whales. And so they habitat partition and they prey partition. So I don't expect to ever see the fish-eating killer whales this far south. I bet Alyssa knows the who was here, who you might have seen, and be better able to speak to the second part of your comment.
Yeah, the killer whales that you saw were very rarely seen bigs or transient killer whales, mammal eaters, that we've actually only documented. That was the 7th time since 1996 that they've been seen. This is the furthest south they've been seen. Our catalog numbers are CA56 is the mom, and she's got a teenage son and an older juvenile and a younger juvenile. And those are 56A, 56B, and CA56C. And they were with CA133, who is most likely her mom. The last time they were seen was December 2023 in Santa Barbara, and they've been mostly seen in Monterey. And we've gone 6 years, 8 years, 11 years between sightings, so that was super special.
Wow.
But those were mammal-eating killer whales.
Awesome. And then, let's talk about what you can do after, while we all mingle out front. There are a lot of things that you can do. What you're doing right now, getting educated about the different populations and what's imperiling them, is step number one. Step number two is passing on that information to other people. And then there's many other steps. Let me just mention on our website, wildorca.org/action, we've got specific things that people can do as well.
Thank you very much. Just astonishing. You have calculated it so good. Yeah, you're so great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, thank you.
So the routine is you come down, we go out, we socialize, we talk, you learn more in conversation. We have the onyx wine. I have to mention the next lecture. You thought this one was special. The next one is myself and Jenny Dean, our Vice President of Conservation and Education, but we're also going to be talking about California wildlife, very much in this spirit. I don't think we'll be as good as this, but we're still special. So next one is California wildlife, and enjoy the conversation.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, that was fun.
We're going to take you.